Yeah. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to extend a very warm welcome to all our dignitaries, esteemed speaker, and participants to the online fireside chat with Shri Rajnish Kumar, former chairman of State Bank of India, on custodian of trust views on financial happenings in this edition of the Thought Leadership Series organized by the IMC Chamber of Commerce and Industry. All participants will be muted to avoid any disturbances during the course of this session. To consume less bandwidth and have clarity, all are requested to stop video streaming at your end. Kindly post all the relevant queries in the chat section. As we begin, may I request Mr. Juzal Khurakiwala, President, IMC Chamber of Commerce and Industry, to present the welcome address. Over to you, Mr. Khurakiwala.
Thank you, Selvi. Good evening to all of you. And once again, wish you all a very, very happy New Year, and happy New Year to Mr. Rajnish, especially on this event. Thank you for being with us, Thank you, Mr. Kumar. Mr. Rajnish Kumar began from a modest house in one of the narrowest lanes of the old city of Meerut. From being a probationary officer in the State Bank of India in 1980, he rose to be its chairman in 2017. Mr. Rajnish Kumar had an amazingly interesting journey in which he saw many changes in India's banking sector that greatly impacted the country and our economy. As the chairman of SBI, Mr. Rajnish Kumar recounts that his term was quite momentous as the period from 7th October 2017 and to 6th October 2020, during which he shouldered this responsibility, was indeed very unique. The Indian banking sector was going through one of its most tumultuous phases. The problem of non-performing loans had severely impacted the balance sheets and profitability of banks, especially those in the public sector. Mr. Rajnish Kumar also cracked the Certified Associate of Indian Institute of Bankers Examination. The senior bank official previously also headed the SBI Capital Markets Limited, the merchant banking arm of State Bank of India, as managing director and chief executive officer prior to becoming managing director of SBI. Mr. Kumar currently is an independent director, a member of Audit Committee and Risk Committee of Asian entity at HSBC. He is also a director of India's Lighthouse Communities Foundation, independent director of Larsen & Toubro Infotech Limited, senior advisor of Bearings Private Equity Asia Private Limited in Singapore, advisor of Kotak Investment Advisors Limited in Mumbai. He joined the board of fintech firm Bharat Pay as a chairman, which he has entered into a partnership with Centrum. Mr. Rajnish Kumar's recent book, The Custodian of Trust, which I'm holding with me right now, and which I'm currently reading as well, and I recommend all of you to read this, is extremely candid and anecdotal, and talks about subjects from demonetization to the Yes Bank fiasco to Jet Airways and the YONO platform, which is now being advertised extensively in India. YONO means you only need one. It's an amazing platform. When you read this book, you will appreciate what YONO is all about. We are sincerely thankful to Mr. Rajnish Kumar to have accepted our invitation to address our members on the topic, Custodian of Trust, Views on Financial Happenings. This fireside chat is being organized under the Chamber's new initiative, Thought Leadership Forum, under which the Chamber will have thought leaders from diverse domains to engage in discussion on topical issues for the benefit of our members. I would also like to thank our own Deepak Prem Narayan for kindly agreeing to be the moderator for today's fireside chat. Mr. Deepak Prem Narayan is a past president of our Chamber and executive chairman, ICS Group, focusing on real estate, asset management, financial services, and hospitality. He has led the group's ventures into diverse sectors and continues to serve as the executive chairman of the group. A small brief about IMC. Since its inception in 1907, the Chamber represents the voice of over 400,000 businesses and industry establishments across India from diverse sectors of industry, with its membership base of over 5,000 members and over 150 trade associations affiliated to it. The chamber has evolved into an institution keeping pace with the time by adapting itself to contemporary trends, while at the same time continuing the path of its proud legacy of over a century in the service of nation building and simultaneously fulfilling its responsibility toward the welfare and well-being of society. Once again, I welcome you all and invite Mr. Rajnish Kumar, former chairman SBI, and Mr. Deepak Prem Narayan, past president of IMC and executive chairman ICS Group, to enlighten the audience with their thought-provoking address. Thank you. Over to you, Deepak.
Thank you, Mr. Khurakiwala. May I now request the moderator of the session, Shri Deepak Prem Narayan, past president of IMC and executive chairman ICS Group, to initiate the fireside chat. Over to you, Mr. Prem Narayan.
Thank you. Zuzar, thank you very much. And Rajnish, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you.
Zuzar, if I might add, he is also recently joined the Hero Motorcorp board. So that was about a month ago. So, what this brings to light is that here is a man who led an institution. Of course, he was very innovative. He brought in a lot of digital activities into the State Bank platform. But more importantly, a man is recognized when he is not actually on that powerhouse seat. Now, why is that? I mean, you look at the number of boards that you mentioned, and I mentioned about Hero also, and I'm conscious that he has declined various other boards. It is precisely because the trust that people have in him. And it's also that he's been a doer. Now, if I might just relate an anecdote here, and Rajnish, you will remember this. You and I met one evening at the Willingdon Club, and we were there at a function. And we had just met a couple of times before. You won't believe this, that conversation lasted for 2 minutes and we struck a partnership. The partnership was between World Bank, United Nations, and SBI. The focus was gender equality and women economic empowerment. Why I'm saying this is the speed with which he operated, the speed with which he took a decision. Zuzar, you mentioned about non-performing assets. I just like to mention something here, is that one of the things that we're going to talk about is that why and how India can be a $5 trillion economy. And what I'll try and do is to list some of the impediments that are there before us. And let's imagine that if you had the authority, whether which cap you wore, it would be politically, I'll just say that if you had the authority, what would be the steps that you would take? Now, to this, if you can build up, I mean, if you have a look what happened to the Yes Bank and how you tackle that episode, and if you can share that with our members, and then we can move on to the 5 trillion part of it, and how you address the issue of Jet Airways, and what was the resolution that you found. If I might request you to please take over.
Thank you so much, Deepak, and thank you, Mr. Joseph. And you can hear me, right?
Very well.
Okay. So thank you, Mr. Joseph, and I want to thank all the members of the management committee of the IMC. I know it is one of the oldest chambers and very active, and it sits right in Mumbai, which is the financial capital of the country. And Deepak, as he rightly said, that it was about a partnership only about United Nations and World Bank and the State Bank of India, but it was also a personal friendship, which I found on that day in a social function, and which I believe is going to be a long-lasting friendship between Deepak and myself. And thank you very much. That I know that for some time you were not so well, but you took this opportunity still to be present here today and be a moderator. So first of all, like you asked me about that before we move on to the issue, which is around the macroeconomics and how does India realize its ambition of becoming a 5 trillion economy. Some of the experience which I have shared in my book about the Yes Bank and Jet Airways. So one is that whenever I was facing these situations relating to either the non-performing loans for the State Bank of India and the banking industry. Why I say banking industry? Because the State Bank of India in most of the consortium is the largest, and therefore all the banks look towards the State Bank of India for leadership in resolution and recovery of these assets. Yes Bank, I would say that it was a very unprecedented situation. Yes Bank is the fourth largest private sector bank in the country. And banks, whether small or big, if any bank shows sign of weakness, or if there is any possibility the banks will fail, the implications for the country's banking and financial system and the economy are very profound. And that's why you would see that the regulators or the authorities, they are very, very concerned whenever there's a problem with any financial institution. I have captured in my book, The Custodian of Trust, about like when the problem started happening in India's financial sector, and it all started with ILFS, and later on we have Diwan Housing, PMC, Yes Bank, the latest is State Finance, and I think that's not the end of the story. But why saving a bank becomes so important, as I mentioned, because of the interconnectedness. A bank would never go alone, would not go down under alone. Deepak knows it, he is a banker himself and a very distinguished banker. A bank, if it goes down under, it will take many others along with it. And many banks I have not mentioned in my book. There were a couple of banks where SBI silently stepped in to provide them the liquidity support, because I didn't want to mention those names. But that was just a pointer to the fact that the mere signs of a trouble of a Yes Bank meant trouble for many other smaller banks, particularly in the private sector. So the unique thing about the Yes Bank revival or resurrection is that, one, it was a joint effort, I would say. Of course, initiative was with the State Bank of India, and it had to be because the State Bank of India, by its sheer size and the dominance it enjoys in the banking industry in India, so there was nobody else who would have done that job. I happened to be there in the chairman's seat. It is just a matter of chance. So whoever was the chairman, ultimately this responsibility of leading the initiative to save Yes Bank, I am very, very I believe that it would have fallen ultimately on the State Bank of India. But it was a very fine effort where there was a cooperation and partnership between State Bank of India and many private banks led by Uday Kotak, Deepak Parekh, and supported by Sandeep Bakshi and Chaudhary of Axis Bank. So these were the major banks, and many other private sector banks participated in, and the intervention of Reserve Bank of India, who played a very critical role. And of course, in any country, nothing happens without the support of the government of India. So Government of India, Reserve Bank, State Bank of India, private players, it became a collective effort, but ultimately somebody had to provide the necessary leadership and time commitment, which I happen to be in the chair, so I had to do that job. But it was because of this collective effort and RBI having the requisite powers to take certain actions that why Yes Bank would be safe. I spent more time on finding a solution to the jet airways problem. Many times people used to ask that, as a SBI chairman, why are you taking so much interest in revival of jet airways? It was unpalatable to many people, because for me, jet airways, it was not a problem. Our exposure in jet air was a mere 650 crore rupees, which is nothing for, which is a lot of amount, but I'm talking in relative terms. I'm not saying 650 crore is not a small amount. In relative terms, for the State Bank of India, which had non-performing loan of more than 2 lakh crore, so 650 crore did not make a difference. I would have easily provided for it. And But as I say that being the leader and being in the chair of the State Bank of India, there are certain sort of responsibilities and obligations, and I always have believed that we may say that the enterprise is private or public. And many times there is a debate or an argument that the taxpayers' money should not be used to revive the private sector. I always have been holding a contrary view. To me, every business is a national asset. Whether it is ownership is government or its ownership with the private sector, but the asset or the business is national because of their economic activity is what makes the economy thrive and survive. If a private enterprise closes down, in the process, it takes away so many jobs, so much revenue to the government. There are so many linkages. So allowing any entity to fail is having a very negative impact on the country, and that's why this debate about taxpayers' money being used to serve the private sector entities, it is not a very justifiable argument in my view. Every asset is a national asset. But absence of an authority like Reserve Bank of India, who has all the powers, and that was the key differentiator in my view. I did not have any authority or any regulator who had the powers to take decisions. And despite more effort being put in to see that Jet Airways doesn't fail, that effort did not succeed. So the point is that if you want to save any enterprise, not one institution can do it. It is a collective effort, and everybody has to be same page. It cannot be a situation where I as a lender think differently. There are 10 other lenders who think differently. The regulators think differently and the government thinks differently. If everyone is not on the same page, then the effort made will never be successful. So this is my biggest learning from these two very, I would say, very critical situations which I handled, and why one succeeded and one could not. So Devaji, I will just stop here for the next.
Okay. Now, but as far as the Yes Bank transaction goes, it was only at when 23 hours and 59 minutes were over, you sealed it, and the kind of effort that went behind it.
Yes.
So I thought you might like to just share just a line or two about that.
Which one? Sorry, I missed it.
No. The Yes Bank. The closure.
Yeah.
In terms of doing the transaction, how it took at the last minute you were able to accomplish that.
Yes. So it was, I would say that it was a 1 week effort only. On 5th March, the moratorium on Yes Bank was announced. And nobody believed at that time that it would be revived so quickly. And of course, as I said, that in that 1 week, one was to find the required capital. And the required capital requirement was almost 22,000 crore. And without participation from many international investors, finding that amount of capital was not possible. But ultimately, we had to settle for half of that amount, which I was able to mobilize from the domestic investors. So that was very critical. And liquidity support from Reserve Bank of India was very critical. And I don't think there is any instance or across the globe where within 10 days we were able to lift the moratorium on.
Yes.
Yes, Bank. I'm not seeing any such precedents. And I think this time, if it had not happened, and then 22 March, the lockdown happened. So just imagine that 5th March, there is a moratorium, and 17th March, the bank is up and running. And just 1 week before, 22nd March, when the lockdown happened.
Sure.
A difference of 10 days or a delay of 10 days, the picture would have been very different. In lockdown, I don't know what put at that.
No, thanks. Thanks for sharing that. So, as the topic is about the $5 trillion and economy reaching that figure, and with that, I'd like to include two other things during the course of the conversation, is the role that private banks can play in that, and how feasible is it about private banks, and about cryptocurrencies. So we'll cover that. But Zuzar Khurakiwala, he mentioned about what our country went through in non-performing assets and how that shook the economy. But I'll just make a few points here. At the heart of this is the risk. And this failure is all got to do with over decades to arrest the creeping banking sector because it's been physically isolated. Ownership of banks, I find, on a day-to-day basis is macro-managed, and where banks are not allowed to play their role as intermediaries between the borrower and the saver. So that itself is another problem. Then you have a look at what our finance ministers, when compared to finance ministers in other countries, they effectively, at the budget, they declare the credit budget on the basis of the banks. And this is when, in the annual financial speech, you look at the chief ministers in many cases, and there was an instance of there was an instance about in 2012, when the finance minister and the government in the center gave away freebies, and the election year was coming, and the chief minister they were giving away freebies. Now, the impact of this is on the balance sheet of the country. So if you've got to reach the 5 trillion, this is one of the points that I'm making, is about the politics, the political credit cycle, if I might call that, Now, the consequences of this are also, this is another aspect, is that then you got to provide for risk as a banker. So therefore, the lending cost also becomes a little higher. Now, if you have a look at asset quality, and if you look at asset quality between, let's say, Russia, Italy, and the outliers, the three large economies, India. In Italy, the NPAs are in the region and PCRs are in the region of 15%. India is at about 10.5% and Russia is 11%. Whereas you look at China, it's 2%. America, this is even up to last year, China was 2%. Indonesia is 2.5%. UK is about 4%, and the US is 1%. Then you have a look at the ROEs, the return on equity for our banking system here. In India, it's minus 2.4. In the United States, it's about 3%. It's 8% in the UK. And the highest out of this, Brazil is at 17%, and South Africa, which is at 20%. Now, because the risks are adequately covered, asset qualities are good. Now, we are carrying that baggage, and because of the non-performing assets, and you have a look, when in 2020, the real estate sector, effectively their loans, instead of it going into different boxes, they were sort of, they were given fresh blood and they were revived. So those bad loans did not happen. The other part is that the hard work, which was done from 91, and in that period, the reforms that came through, all these have a life. They get tired after some time. China, the Asian tigers, they grew because they were running on a treadmill. And they had to run faster and faster every year to keep that growth rate. So in my mind, there is no silver bullet which is going to get us this. So I'm going to make it a little difficult. I'll touch on 2 or 3 other points. You take, for instance, the labor code. Legislation has not yet been passed. So that's another issue. You take, is it that in India, because the middle class has been a mover and shaker globally, now for us, the middle class here, I get the feeling that we are caught in what I call is the middle class trap, which is that we are happy at about $2,000, $3,000, that kind of middle class, 350 million people, if I might say so. Another instance is that agriculture is such an important sector. Now with the farm laws, I believe the process was entirely wrong. And I'm not talking in terms of politics. The government wanted to do a very good thing. I mean, the laws are required in my mind, and they would have brought about transformation. But the process was wrong. You know, it didn't go through the parliamentary committee, it didn't go through the bill. Now that is also an issue when global investors, if I reach out to them for infrastructure funds, and that's another point that I'd like you to cover for the House here. You look at taxation. The FM said that it's going to be 30%, but the marginal rate today at the highest level is 44%. You know, I mean, today also against the tax authorities, there are issues. I mean, lots of people face issues. So if I might come to that, and I'll get to the private banks a little later. So I'll open this up for you now. I've given the downside of it. I've given this a younger population. There are startups that are happening. There are monies that are starting to come in. But when you compare the number of startups in India and with the ones that are happening in China, we're not even at 5% per annum in terms of the number of startups. So the issue is that if we are aiming for that, and we have these kind of bottlenecks which are there with us, which are in the financial side, the fiscal side, the trade side, how are we going to get over that? How would you do it?
Yeah. So like the canvas is very wide, as you have covered so many things yourself. But the fact of the matter is that despite so many reforms, today, the investment on GDP ratio has not improved. And same is the case with what you call is gross capital formation to GDP ratio. It has in fact come down from 32% to 27%. So the problem with our country is that we always miss the bus. And the reforms which the current government has carried out, they all have been very difficult reforms. Whether it is introduction of insolvency code or introduction of GST. Both have been very difficult. And then the latest intent of the government about seeking more participation from the private capital, where only 4 entities are supposed to be under government ownership in strategic sectors, and rest of the sectors government said they don't want to be there, they want to exit. And recently successful, not completely concluded, but even divestment of Air India, it was not an easy task, that it has taken, I think, more than 3 or 4 years to take. So when I look at it, at the central government level, I find that there is a willingness to take tough decisions and initiate tough reforms. The problem comes when it comes to the execution lower down the bureaucracies. So on ease of doing business also, India's ranking has improved. But if today you or I want to set up a new unit in any of the districts in our country, I am telling you, it will be a harrowing experience. It will not be a pleasant experience. So all this ease of doing business will disappear when you go to the district level bureaucracy and want to start an enterprise. And I will share you one very small example that when I was heading UK operations and I wanted to open a branch in Wolverhampton, and my total investment was 150,000 pounds or 200,000 pounds, and number of people to be employed was just 4. And when I went to open the branch in Wolverhampton, the kind of VIP treatment I got, I have never got it even if I open 1,000 branches in one day of State Bank of India in this country. So the point is that the way any investment, big or small, is welcomed in the other countries. And you see another example which I remember, that when Tata said that they wanted to close down some operations in UK, and there one of the ministers came flying to Bombay, that why are you closing it down? So Tata's is a private investment. Why a minister of a UK government is flying to Mumbai to save that investment and the enterprise? Can we imagine a similar situation happening in India? We cannot. So the overall attitude and the problems which the businesses face at the lower level of bureaucracies, they are immense problems. And that's why whether it is acquisition of land, whether it is permissions, approvals, it is a hell lot of a task, and you people know it better, or the people who have invested in industry, they know it better than me. So India needs huge investment in infrastructure. There is absolutely no doubt about it. Our infrastructure is still, as compared to all the countries, developed and all nearby countries which are not separate, it remains poor. Some good work is happening in the road sector. We've seen it. It is visible. But power sector is very critical infrastructure, and there are a host of issues around power sector reforms. So over a period of time, we have bound ourselves in such a policy base that whenever you try to unravel it, there would be some vested interest, they would not allow it to be done. So that's why the productivity of Indian economy continues to be great. What is productivity? Ultimately, if you look at any factor of production, whether it is capital, whether it is land, whether it is labor. So our productivity is low. You mentioned about agriculture. Now in India, 50% of our workforce is dependent on agriculture, and agriculture, the ratio of agriculture in the overall economic contribution is just 15%. So obviously our agriculture is very, very unproductive. Agriculture worldwide, it is a difficult business to be in, and without government support, and even in developed countries, government needs to support their farmers and agriculture sector. India is not an exception to that extent, but our productivity continues to be low. And so if India wants to become a $5 trillion economy, obviously we can't be happy with a 5% or a 5.5% or a 6% growth. COVID has further complicated the problems as far as the economic output is concerned. So we need to grow above 8%. And how do we grow above 8%? We can grow above 8% when there is a huge investment in the economy. Taxes are not as high as you were mentioning. There has to be surplus in the hands of the people as well as in the hands of the corporates. On the corporate taxation front, I think we can't complain today. The corporate taxes have been made very reasonable. And then you have production linked incentives, a lot of, again, good intent on the part of the government to promote manufacturing, that is again very visible. But I think there's no magic wand. We need to step up the GDP growth. It has to be consistently above 8% at least or above. That can come only when you have huge investment actually made. So now when we talk about 5-year and more than 100 lakh crore requirement for infrastructure investment, but I don't find any visibility about how it will be funded. I have no numbers that how much has been done. Whether that goalpost of 100 lakh crore in 5 years that can that investment, whether it is actually happening on the ground or not. So investment demand goes through moderate taxation, making the ease of doing business at the lower level of the website, not at the central government level. And the availability of land, availability of labor at reasonable prices. So all that needs to be done. One redeeming feature is about, I can say, that adoption of technology in India. Maybe it may not be as fast as USA or China. China, I think, has become the leader technology. But we are not lagging behind as far as adoption of technology is concerned. And technology is being used in delivering of public services also in a very big manner. So ultimately, we need to improve the productivity of our economy. And that can happen only when the reforms, particularly in power sector, are carried out and the lower level are carried out. The current rate of investment, particularly by private sector, is not enough. And government has its own limitation on its resources because of the competing demand on its resources. So government alone cannot do the heavy lift. And how do we encourage the private sector participation and overall the attitude in the country where we look positively towards the businesses and their contribution to the development of the economy. There is a lot of skepticism around the business houses and the business. So that also we need to change our attitude, because ultimately we need private sector investment in a big way, whether it is manufacturing, whether it is agriculture, whether it is infrastructure. We cannot totally be dependent on the government to provide all the capital, which is not fair.
So, Rajnish, thanks you for putting it across so well. But I have a couple of points. One is that I'll come back because the issue is that around the risks that is there in the country. And these risks are related to various institutions which have been destroyed, particularly in the financial side, and the hurt that it is causing. But, as I said, it's become a political cycle in terms of but if I might just come back to what you said, if we have to grow, then you have to have your arms open. On one hand, India has refused to sign the RCEP. Now, how do I get technology in? If I want my exports to grow, okay, this year, we might grow because there has been a backlog, etc., and certain gaps are being filled up. But if we have to grow, then we have to not keep raising duties. Today, it's after every 6 months, 1% goes up here, 2% goes up there. Even the GST, what has happened recently, textile rate has gone up from 5 to 10%, if I'm mistaken, not of 15%, which is ridiculous, because that's a sector which was just reviving in India. I mean, Bangladesh, Vietnam, and the others have taken away a lot of business. So our policy in terms of, attracting investment, today we may do it in the case of, one company, Apple, let's say, or Foxconn, but on a sustaining basis. So that was one of the factors. Now, if you have a look in terms of the private sector, the banks, private sector being given opportunities to open banks, there again, the government came up with that policy, but nothing has happened effectively. I, for one, am not in favor of corporates who are in NBFCs to have a license to open a bank. That's another part. But more importantly, is that the government instead went and launched 2 banks on its own. One is the bad bank, and the other one is the one that KV Kamath is heading. I forget the name of that. So therefore, for the next 5 years of private sector banks coming up is also going to be almost impossible. But the issue, I yet would like you to sort of, these, I would, there is a remark that the government, yes, it is a reflection of society, but that's what I said, and this is one of our colleagues here to put that down. It is where we are caught in the middle class trap. We are very happy here with $2,000 or $3,000 per capita income. So, with that, I'm happy with what is being doled out. But how does one take it from there? Productivity in certain sectors, yes, climate change is going to come in. It's going to become far more important today than, let's say, the hydropower, not hydro, let's say coal-based power. Already moves are coming in. You look at Tata's as a group. I'll give you one instance. Their boilers in steel and Tata Power is no longer based on coal. It's moving to biogas. It's moving to other forms of energy. But if you look at actual, I'm lost that how will my economy grow? And 8% is too low a figure.
No, you have to speak in relative terms. When you are growing consistently at 5.5%, then 8% is itself appears to be a tall order. And I know that at one point of time, for several years, China grew at 10 and 11%, and that's why they could be where they are today. And about the risk management, definitely there has been an issue around the risk management as far as the banking sector is concerned. And it was not only the risk management, but the pricing of the risk also, there were issues. The problem is, again, and I'm telling you from my experience as chairman of the State Bank of India, that the environment and the ecosystem for infrastructure is so risky in this country that if, as a banker, I price that risk of financing the infrastructure, I would not be able to lend them less than 16 to 17%. Now it is a chicken and egg situation. If banks start charging 16, 17% for financing the infrastructure given the risk, then the project itself will become unviable from day one. It cannot be viable at 16 and 17%. And that is the point again and again I'm making, that the policy environment in our country is so uncertain that there is no sanctity of contracts. Bankers work on certain assumptions. Those assumptions, they have no sanctity. Tomorrow, overnight, there will be a policy change, either by the government or by a state government or by a local authority or by a judicial group. So how do I envisage and foresee all the risks?
Absolutely. Absolutely
And
correct.
because of that, you find that in this country, more than 50 EPC companies have disappeared. Anyone who was involved in EPC, because of all the policy logjams and because they deal with the enterprises or the government department, so more than 50 have disappeared. And banks or many institutions, like we mentioned about infrastructure, they may have their own governance issues. I don't say that they didn't have governance issues. But at the same time, they were in such a field, financing of infrastructure, where everyone who was associated with financing of infrastructure, they had to incur losses because some were big. Say, for example, like State Bank of India. So we were able to survive. The smaller ones, they disappear. So we need consistent policies, number one. We need to recognize that the entrepreneurs or private capital, they need to earn a decent return. Otherwise, everybody will be happy keeping money in the banks. Risk-free return, do nothing. But if they are taking risk, then they need a reward. And that is something which is not assured today because of the flip-flops which happen as far as policies are concerned. In our country, we invested or created more than 20,000 megawatt capacity in gas sector on the assurance that gas will be available. And one fine day, bankers and the investors have a letter on their time that gas cannot be provided. So you create 22,000, 24,000 megawatt capacity, and all that investment goes down the drain. So in such an environment, how do we give confidence to the investor about rewarding them for the risks they take? So if the risks, because of all the policy and ecosystem are high, then the expectation for reward will also be high. So we need to bring down the risk, I agree. And that can happen only when there is a stability in the policy end. Anyone who changes a policy midway, they should never do it from retrospective. Anything you can do it prospective. But retrospective change, it is immensely harmful as far as the investment is concerned. So that is one. You talked about Bank and NAFID, which is an infrastructure finance institution. So these are the institutions which are yet to find their feet. And about even the infrastructure finance institution, for their success also it is very important that there is a consistency as far as the policies are concerned around creation of infrastructure. And once something has been announced and committed, then nobody should go back on their commitment. Otherwise, what different this institution will be able to do if the ecosystem and the environment around the infrastructure development and financing does not change. The bank, of course, we are still not sure when will it start functioning. Some issue I read as talk about having a separate resolution entity and how to resolve it. Let us see. But these are the steps, in my view, in the right direction, and GST simplification, in my view, is a must. There's a mixed view which I get. Many people, particularly in the organized sector, they are very happy. But the unorganized sector and the smaller entities, they find compliance burden to be very high, and there are issues around execution and implementation. So simplification of GST regime for the people who are not so organized but still constitute a very important part of the economy, they needs a thorough look the way GST has been implemented. This I'm talking based on the feedback which I keep on getting while talking to the people. But if you ask any organized sector, they are very happy with the GST. You ask any small guy and they are very unhappy with the GST. So there is a paradoxical situation.
Well, I think on the GST, we need a bigger debate, possibly.
Yes.
But very quickly, because, unfortunately, time is very short. 6:30 is the sign-off. And I'm sure there are lots of questions people would like to ask around the discussion that we've had. But very quickly, let's say we can spend a couple of minutes on the private banks. The government created a hype around that. What is your view? And I know that you're very keen about technology and cryptocurrencies. So we'll talk about this for about 2-3 minutes of each of these things and then move to question and answer.
Yeah. So one is, I have always maintained that if governance is good, it can be ownership. If government is just an investor, but leaves the governance to the boards and regulation to the Reserve Bank of India, so I think it can work. But by virtue of the fact that if government has 51% ownership or more, there are certain constitutional obligations also on it. So if that is difficult, then in 2021, as compared to 1969, I believe that the private sector banks can play more role, and the public sector banks, in any case, as far as the lending is concerned, they are constantly losing the market share. So in such circumstances, I think the approach of the government where they want to privatize some of the public sector banks, it won't do any harm to anybody. That's what my view is. Now, whether they will be able to do it, how will they do it, that remains to be seen. And particularly after the issues around the farm sector reforms in the bill, and where it faced a lot of resistance. So that is one, but the ultimately it is the capability of the Reserve Bank of India to govern, to oversee and regulate these banks. But the private sector banks, I think the country is much more confident today in 2021. And when it comes to social banking obligations, there can be ways and means to ensure that social banking obligations are also fulfilled by the private sector banks, and they can be incentivized to do so, and they will be willing to do so. The other question around the technology, so any organization, whether it's banking, finance, manufacturing, nobody can survive in tomorrow's world if they don't have a technology at the core of their strategy and what they do, whether it is sourcing, or whether it is distribution, manufacturing, services, whatever. The technology would be at the core. About the crypto, again, there are many divergence views. Nobody has been able to first define it. Second, nobody has been able to, across the globe, I am telling you, there are very conflicting views around it of the courts, of the governments, different jurisdictions are dealing with it differently. But again, that is a reality. And when you are in a connected world, so you can't wish it away. So ultimately, we will have to find a way to deal with this new animal called crypto.
But you're so correct. It's such a difficult animal because, customer protection is so difficult.
Yeah.
And anti-money laundering, monies can go towards terrorism. It's prone to frauds. The volatility is so much today that it's highly speculative in nature. So monetary policy transmission also has got an issue around it. Currency substitution. So it is an interesting topic, but yes, you're correct. And there is a lot of different views on this. But the point that you make is correct, whether it's services today or whether it's manufacturing for that matter. And even in healthcare today, you look at India as an opportunity.
Anything.
Yeah. Sorry?
Even agriculture.
Yes, yes. No. There is a German who started a startup in India. It's already worth about $30 million. And it started off putting farmers to identify which products are which insects are attacking them. Now, as a result of that, they know the right pesticide. Then he's moved from B2B, B2C, and he's starting an NBFC and microfinance. That's a separate thing. But no, thank you very much. I think if you don't mind, I'll request the House, if they have any questions, they could raise their hands, and Selby, then you can unmute them.
Mr. Chauhan?
Thank you, Mr. Kumar. Thank you, Deepak. Excellent discourse. I think that it has been very stimulating. Sir, you mentioned about the ease of doing business is improved. I totally agree with you. But you also mentioned that it gets diluted where
Your voice is breaking, Mr. Chauhan.
Hello,
Yeah.
Mr. Chauhan. Your voice is breaking, sir.
Can you knock the video off? If you can knock the video off and just be an audio.
Please shut your video and ask the question, sir. I think we have lost connectivity.
Yeah. I think
public governance. And in public governance, there are two aspects again, the political leaders, their governance, and the bureaucrats' governance. Easier to my mind is to work with bureaucrats. So I'd like to pick your brain, sir, as to how we can improve the public governance, particularly working with bureaucrats, so that at the policy level, at the state and district level, we do not lose out the ease of doing business. Thank you.
Sorry, honestly, I don't have an answer to that question. How do you do it? But I think, again, maybe it is not the panacea, but what we have, or you would have also experienced that if there is a consistent and transparent policy, and where the delivery is through use of technology, I think we can get a better outcome. So whenever there is a manual intervention or a person is deciding and there is no clarity on the rules and the policies, then there is a problem. But ultimately, the power of the lower level bureaucracy in this country is disproportionate in my opinion.
I agree.
How you tackle it, I really don't have an easy answer.
Yes, Mr. President, Joseph Khorakiwala.
I have a short question, and I would like a brief answer. What if Yes Bank had failed? What could have been a larger implication for the entire society in general and to the banking ecosystem if the Yes Bank had failed?
No, as I said in my opening remark, it would have not failed alone. And that is what we have to consider. a bank would have not fallen alone because of interconnectedness. There could be 2-3 other banks also, and then the problem would have become unmanageable. Why RBI, you see, why RBI would be bothered? Forget about Yes Bank, about even a small bank like Lakshmi Vilas Bank or a much smaller entities. Because of their interconnectedness, they don't fail alone. In the process, they take many others with them. And as I said that for confidentiality reasons, I cannot publicly disclose the name. But there were a couple of banks which were supported by State Bank of India during that period by providing them liquidity. Otherwise, trouble was brewing in many other smaller banks. And failure of any bank is, it is disastrous for everyone.
Thank you.
Otherwise, why would anybody bother? So Jet Airways, it failed. But we could not have the same attitude about the Yes Bank.
Mr. Gautam Mehta?
Yep. Sir, excellent talk. And I saw a constant reference when you mentioned 1969 and 1991 and 2021. And being a lawyer and connected with cases in banking, I have seen what has happened over the years with the banking sector. I have a short point to ask of you. That is our alliance with socialism over, and are we moving right, more business oriented, and is our attitude going to change? Because I heard you say that attitude has to change. So this is my point for you. What do you see in the future?
So my answer will not be very new answer. You can't socialize poverty, you need to create wealth. And again, always we take cue from our neighbor China. So they created wealth and now they are doing the redistribution. But first they created the wealth. And the China, it is ruled by a communist party, but they have taken full advantage of the capitalists, created wealth, and now they are redistributing. In our country, what is there to redistribute? So first we have to create wealth and then redistribute. And I tell you, you don't have I think any society as socialist as Europe. They are very socialist society in terms of social welfare. Deepak, you will agree with me?
I agree, absolutely. Absolutely.
But they have wealth. So you can't socialize poverty. So create wealth and have a positive attitude towards wealth creator, whether it's small or big. Because when investment happens, so we should not be jealous of these successful businessmen, let me put it this way. Everybody has equal opportunity in this country. And so we should make use of it. We should honor our wealth creators, don't have a negative attitude towards them. When they invest, they bring employment, they bring economic. So that is where there is a problem in our country. We have a very confused attitude as far as this success and wealth is concerned.
You see that attitude changing, sir?
So change is not so easy, but still I believe that we need very big private sector investment and participation in our country to give a float to the economic growth. We have seen that government cannot do it alone. They don't have the resources. And they don't have the management bandwidth to run enterprises.
Thank you, sir.
Mr.
Thank you.
Singhania?
So good evening, sir. It was a very insightful discussion that you had. I have basically two questions, sir. You talked about wealth creation, and we've seen almost, I think, 40 plus unicorns in this year alone. I mean, last year, right now, in 2021. And I think the history says there are about 25 to 30 in the past, since the startups. So is this a bubble? Is this unicorn? Is it like, Omicron and unicorn, whatever you say it? And so second thing is that, you mentioned 23. So if you were 23 today, what would you do differently? How would you, reshape this economy? Your thoughts, sir.
No, about the unicorns, like valuation is one part, but I'm fascinated by what they're doing and what they're doing. What I have found, and at least with two startups I am now closely associated, one is BharatPe and the other is Oyo. And what they are doing is trying to look at our day-to-day problems and finding a solution which legacy institutions cannot give or do. So that is how I will sum it up. Whether they should be valued and what they are valued, it is for the people who are investing in it to decide on their valuation. But these are all new age companies and the investors are taking a long-term view. They're not taking a 1 year, 2 year, 3 year view. They're taking a long-term view because the future is, future belongs to the people who can think, who can have innovative thinking. Not all of them would succeed, that is also known. But they are reshaping the today's world. And they are present in every sector, whether they are financial or healthcare or agriculture. You take any sector, you will find somebody who is providing you a technology solution and building it. So I think this is a very, very positive and good development as far as India is concerned. We will not be on the top, but we are amongst the top.
So, but do
India
you
is
think
amongst
this
the
is
top
an
three,
investment
top three
bubble?
countries.
So do you think it's a bubble that is it overvalued? Is this, I mean, they're all creating value, they're creating services which are required in the digital era, very much required. But is this something to be forewarned about?
So about the valuation, as I said, that because they are not making profits, and our usual methodology to give value to the company is on the basis of earnings per share and what is the price earning multiple. So the traditional theory of investing doesn't apply. But if you look, and I think everybody looks at Amazon as an example, what it was in 96 and what it is today. If you take Tesla, what it was 15 years ago and what it is today. Where was Facebook even 15 years ago? Where was Google 20 years ago? So just look at the size which they have acquired and then look at the value they have created and their valuations. So I think the way these startups are being valued, the benchmarks and the methodology is different, and it is not your traditional EPS and price earning multiple approach. So that's why there was a what you call .com era in around 2000 and it got bust. .com bust, what we call. So whether it will be something like that, I'm not sure. I'm unable to predict it, but definitely there is a value creation. Now, whether they are overvalued, as I said, that maybe people are taking a 15, 20-year view on them and rather than a 3-year or a 5-year. Your other question, I didn't get. What was the other question?
If you were 23, what would you do differently today?
What I'm doing as 65, 4-year-old. So associating myself with young people like you. I can't be 23 again, but nobody stops me from being in the company of 23, 25, 30. And that is precisely what I am.
Absolutely, absolutely. Okay.
Thank you.
I think, Anand, you want to give your vote of thanks unless you finish that. So.
Sure. Should I? Selby? Okay. So very good evening and wish you all a very happy, healthy, prosperous and safe 22. Like our speaker for today said, you may be at any age, but you need to think where you want to be and associate yourselves with people, like-minded people, thought leaders like our speakers for today. So it's my privilege and to propose this vote of thanks at this end of this highly insightful fireside chat on custodian of trust views on financial happenings. What a wonderful start to the new year, sir. I'd like to express my sincere thanks to Shri Rajnish Kumar, former Chairman, State Bank of India, who readily responded to our request to be with us today despite his busy schedule. The increasing interest in digital assets from both retail and institutional investors has given rise to the growth of custody options. As the market evolves, various types of custody options have emerged, and new providers are seeking to establish the structures and controls that work best in their markets for their propositions. So your thought-provoking address on today's topic enlightened us all. On an optimistic note, he mentioned the need of 1 lakh crores of investment in the next 5 years to lead India to a 5 trillion economy. Sir, we share your optimism. I'd also like to thank Shri Deepak Premnarayan, past president of IMC and executive chairman ICS Group, for moderating today's fireside chat and sharing his learnings of various international markets. I must thank all the participants for being with us today. Your presence is a source of encouragement to the chamber. Once again, I thank Shri Rajnish Kumar and Shri Deepak Premnarayan for gracing this occasion, and all of you. Stay safe and take care. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, Rajnish. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yes, I thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you very much.